guys, it's Miss Chang here. I'm going to be going over the concept of factoring today. So in this one, it's going to relate to Journal 0. What we're going to start off with is some warm-up problems, things that we've seen in Algebra 2 but haven't done in a while. So when we're trying to factor, typically we're looking for the greatest common factor to try to pull out from the terms so that we can factor out as many, the highest number or the highest power as much as possible. So let's take a look at these two. So because there are two terms here, we call this a binomial. And so when I'm looking at the numbers, I see that there is a 6 and a 15. And so 6 and 15 can both be divided by 3. So the greatest common factor, or the GCF, is going to be a 3. So that means I can divide out a 3. Now I have to think about, okay, well, if I divide out a 3, this becomes a 2x, the first term. Drop down that minus sign. If I divide 15 by 3, I have a 5. So this really is the highest number that I can bring out, and I'm left with 2x minus 5 on the inside of the parentheses. Remember, when we distribute that 3, that becomes 6x minus 5. So basically, we're doing the opposite of distribution, and that is called factoring. So now when I look at this one, there's a 16 and a 4. I can factor out a 4, right? 4 can come out of 16 and 4. So 16 divided by 4 is also 4. So that leaves me with a 4x plus, and now if I divide 4 by 4, that's just a 1 left. Because notice if I distribute the 4 times a 1, that gives me back to 4. And then when I look at this here, there's not much more I can factor out. They don't have anything in common. So moving on to this one here, this is also a binomial, but notice that this x is x squared and this x is to the first power. That means I can pull out at least 1x because this is x to the first power. So I know I can drag out an x. And when I look at this 3 and this 12, I can at least grab out a 3, right? Because 3 and 12 can both be divisible by 3. So when I look at this first term, I already took out the 3. I already took out x to the first power, so that means I still have 1x left. Bring down that minus sign that's in between them. Now I took out a 3 from the 12, so that means there's a 4 left behind. But notice that you already took out 1x in this term, so there's no more x's here. So this is just 3x, x minus 4 in parentheses. And then this one here gets a little bit funny because it looks like you have a lot of terms going on here, but this is actually still just two terms, one here, one here. Basically, terms are separated by a plus sign and a minus sign. Now, what I notice in this special case is that they're both have x minus 3 and x minus 3. So that means you can factor out x minus 3 from both terms. But when you do that, notice that you're left with x n plus 5. So in a separate parentheses here, you need to put back the x and the 5. So notice that if you were to distribute this piece to the x, you would get this piece here. If you were to distribute x minus 3 to the 5, you would get this piece here. And that's how we factor. All right, so kind of getting to the definition part here. When it comes to factoring, there are many ways you can factor. There's something called factoring by grouping, factoring trinomials, and the difference of square is also a way we can factor. So anytime you have like 4 terms, so in these cases you had 2 terms. If you have 4 terms to work with, typically you want to use grouping. Let's fill that in. Grouping as a way to factor. And what you do is you group the terms into 2 pairs, and that can help you factor. So basically, notice how there are 4 terms here. Well, you can group them. Let me bring this up just a little bit higher. You can group them into 2. So I am going to group these 2 together and then these 2 together. And so what I try to do is the same as before. So I concentrate on this one first, and I notice this one has a 4 and this one has an 8. I can bring out a 4. That would be the greatest common factor. But I also notice that this one has an x and this has an x as well, so I can at least bring out 1x. But remember, you leave behind, so you took out the 4, you took out one of the x, so you still have an x behind. Bring down that plus sign that's in between them. You took out a 4 from here, so you have now a 2 left behind. And then there's no longer an x here because you brought it outside. So this one is done. I have factored out as much as I can. There's not any more that I can bring out from the x and the plus 2. Whereas this one here, there's a plus sign here, so let's make sure we put a plus sign out here. And if this is a 5 and a 10, you can at least bring out a 5. But it looks like this 10 doesn't have an x, so I can only bring out the constant, the 5. So x comes down, plus sign comes down, and 10 divided by 5 is 2. Well, what I notice here when I did that is that these two, let me see if I can bring out a marker. Both of these have x plus 2. That means you can factor out the x plus 2, kind of like what we did before. So I'm going to factor out the x plus 2. And now notice I have the 4x left and the 5 left. So I'm going to put those two together and make that 4x plus 5. And now I'm done with factoring. So that is finished. So I'm going to box that in as my final answer. So that's how we factor by grouping when you have 4 terms. So same thing here. You can group them up. I also want to mention someone very smart behind this who's watching this might say like, well, Miss Chang, these two are what we call the same types. So you can add these or subtract these together. So this is what we call combining like terms. And you can. But for this sake, I want us to kind of not combine terms for now, but you can. But I want us to practice this grouping. So that's why I'm not combining like terms for here. But you totally can and probably will result in the same answer. So if I were to group them up just like before, I would take the first 2 and group them up and the last 2 and group them up. I would try to factor out. So this is a 6 and a 9. So they both have a common of 3. So I can pull out a 3 or divide out a 3. I can at least take out one x since both of these have an x. So if I take out a 3 from the 6, that means I have a 2 left behind and an x to make that x squared. And if I take a 3 out of the 9, that will be a minus 3. Now for the other one here, this one's an 8 and this one's a 12. So what they have in common is a 4. So in this case, I can pull out, let me drop down that plus sign. And so that means I have a 2x, 12 divided by 4 is a 3, and just bring down that minus sign. And so notice again, we have 2 factors that are the same, so we can pull those out as 2x minus 3, and then 3x plus 4 is left behind. So that gets pulled down in its own parentheses. And there we go, we've factored by grouping. Now, in the next video, I'm going to show you how you can factor trinomials, so that means 3 terms, using 2 different types of factoring that you might have learned in your Algebra 2 class. All right, so stay tuned for that next video.